year is 1993. Japan Airlines has a problem. Their long-haul flights from Narita to Los Angeles are 12 hours of business class passengers staring at the back of a seat. The airline wants to offer something nobody else is offering: real video games played in real time on the actual hardware those games were designed for, at 30,000 feet. They call Sega. And what Sega delivers is called the Mega Jet. It is a Mega Drive with the bottom sawed off, its motherboard compressed into a thick, oversized controller, designed to plug directly into the small LCD monitors in JAL's business class armrests. It has no screen of its own. It has no battery. It runs on AC power piped through the airplane seat. A passenger rents the device and a stack of cartridges for the length of the flight, plays Sonic at altitude, hands it back at customs. The Mega Jet is not a portable console. The Mega Jet is the Mega Drive's organs, removed from their body, kept alive on hospital wiring. But the engineering, the miniaturization of an entire 16-bit home console down to a handheld form factor, that engineering is real. That engineering survives. In March of 1994, Sega of Japan releases a consumer version of the Mega Jet at retail for roughly $123. They market it to businessmen with car televisions, to wealthy commuters with cigarette lighter power adapters, to a customer base that may not actually exist. It sells terribly, but that is fine, because the consumer Mega Jet was never the point. The point was the motherboard. The point was the template. Inside Sega's hardware division, an internal project is opened. Sega has, by 1990s policy, named its prototype hardware after planets. The 32X is Mars. The Saturn is Saturn. A cancelled cartridge console is Jupiter. The new portable is Venus. Project Venus, in its first conceptual drafts, is breathtaking. It is a touchscreen handheld in 1994, a full decade before the Nintendo DS, 2 full years before Tiger Electronics would attempt the same trick with the doomed Game.com. It is, on paper, the most forward-thinking consumer electronics product Sega has ever attempted. It is also impossible. Touchscreen technology in 1994 is prohibitively expensive, technically primitive, and structurally incapable of surviving the kind of physical abuse a child administers to a Game Gear in a station wagon. Sega's engineers, under enormous pressure to keep development costs down, because the Saturn is hemorrhaging budget on the other side of the building, abandon the touchscreen. They go back to the Mega Jet. They take the miniaturized motherboard. They add a color LCD. They add a battery compartment. They add a controller layout milled directly into the face of the unit. 6 face buttons, a directional pad, a start button. They add an AV output port to the top, and a second controller port to the bottom. What they have built, although nobody in 1995 will use the word, is a hybrid console. Slide it out of the dock, take it on a plane, slide it back in, plug it into the TV, hand a controller to your brother. It is, almost exactly, the Nintendo Switch. It is the Nintendo Switch in 1995, running at 7.67 MHz on a 16-bit processor, with 800 existing games already on store shelves the day it launches. Sega's internal projections estimate 1 million units sold in the first year. It is, in retrospect, the only number Sega ever got right. The Nomad launches in October 1995, North America only, no Japanese release, no European release, no marketing campaign, no television advertising, no magazine spreads, no retail end cap, no pack-in game, a price tag of $180. To understand how catastrophically wrong that number is, you have to understand what $180 buys in October of 1995. A brand new Sega Genesis Model 2, the actual home console the Nomad is a portable version of, costs $99 at the same store. A Game Boy Pocket, launching weeks later, costs around $60. A Sony PlayStation, the machine actively destroying Sega's entire corporate strategy on the other side of the showroom, costs $299. and includes a full 32-bit, three-dimensional polygonal future. Sega is asking a parent to walk past the home console, walk past the new handheld, walk past the next generation, and pay nearly double the price of the Genesis itself for a portable version of a 6-year-old machine with no game in the box that requires a separately purchased AC adapter or a separately purchased battery sled to function at all. And then there is the battery sled. Inside the Nomad is a 16-bit Motorola 68000 processor, the same chip that powers the home console, running at the same clock speed, executing the same code from the same cartridges. Inside the Nomad is 64 kilobytes of RAM, 64 kilobytes of video RAM, a Yamaha synthesizer, a Zilog Z80 coprocessor, and a 3¼ inch color screen lit from behind by a cold cathode fluorescent tube. The same kind of bulb you would find in an office ceiling, miniaturized down to the size of a pencil, glowing inside a handheld console. All of this draws power, an enormous amount of power. Power that in 1995, lithium-ion batteries are still too primitive and too expensive to provide. So Sega bolts a sled to the back of the Nomad. The sled holds 6 AA batteries. Not 4, not 5, 6. The Game Boy uses 4 AA and runs for roughly 20 hours. The Nomad uses 6 AA and runs for 2.5. If the cartridge contains a special coprocessor, the Sega Virtua processor inside Virtua Racing, for example, the 6 batteries can be drained completely in 90 minutes. The math here is unkind. In 1995, a brand name AA alkaline battery costs roughly 50 to 75 cents at retail. A full set of 6 is between $3 and $4.50. Divided by 2.5 hours of playtime, the Nomad costs somewhere between $1.20 and $1.80 per hour to play. The Game Boy, by the same measurement, costs 10 to 15 cents per hour. The Nomad, hour for hour, is between 10 and 18 times more expensive to operate than the device it is trying to defeat. Sega does offer a solution. It is called the Power Back, an optional rechargeable nickel-cadmium battery pack. It costs $79 on top of the $180 console. It is heavy. It takes 12 hours to charge. It provides less playtime than the alkaline batteries. It is almost impossible to find in stores. Most Nomad owners in 1995 never see one in person. So the practical reality of owning a Sega Nomad in 1995 is this. You buy the console, you buy the AC adapter, you sit on your couch, you plug the AC adapter into the wall. You play your portable Sega Genesis in exactly one location, tethered by a cord 3 feet from a power outlet, while your actual Sega Genesis sits 2 feet away, plugged into a television, doing the same thing better. The handheld is not handheld. Portable does not travel. The future of gaming is sitting on the floor next to a wall socket, and it gets worse. Because the Nomad is being launched in the middle of a corporate civil war. By 1995, Sega is not a company. Sega is 2 companies pretending to be one. Sega of America, run by Tom Kalinske out of Redwood City, has spent 5 years systematically dismantling Nintendo's monopoly on the United States video game market. Kalinske's strategy has been brilliant. Aggressive price cuts. The Sonic pack-in. Under Kalinske, Sega of America has clawed past Nintendo to control over 50% of the 16-bit market. The Genesis in America is a cultural force. In Japan, the Mega Drive is a footnote. Nintendo's Super Famicom dominates the home market so thoroughly that Sega of Japan's executives, led by President Hayao Nakayama, develop a kind of bitter defensive resentment toward their wildly successful American subsidiary. Sega of America is making the money. Sega of Japan is making the decisions. And in 1995, Sega of Japan makes a decision that will end the company. Nakayama, terrified of Sony's impending PlayStation launch, orders Sega of America to abandon the 16-bit Genesis ecosystem early, pivot all marketing dollars to the 32-bit Sega Saturn, and moved the Saturn's launch date forward from September to May. The Saturn's surprise launch is announced at the first ever E3 convention in May of 1995. Tom Kalinske is, by every account, furious. Major retailers, including KB Toys and Walmart, are not informed of the new launch date in time to stock the console. Third-party developers, blindsided, do not have software ready. The Saturn arrives in stores with almost no games and almost no shelf space. It is one of the worst console launches in the history of the medium, and it happens 4 months before the Nomad. So when the Nomad arrives in October, it is born into a company that is hemorrhaging cash, fighting a losing war against Sony on a completely different front, and openly signaling to its own customers that the 16-bit era is over. Every marketing dollar Sega has is being thrown into propping up the Saturn. There is nothing left for a portable Genesis. There is nothing left for anything. A leaked internal document from this period contains a single line of dialogue between Tom Kalinske and Sega of America marketing executive Len Cicciaretto. Kalinske is asking, in writing, why there is no promotional spend allocated to position the Nomad against the Game Boy. Cicciaretto replies, "Tom, you're going to hear this a lot this year, so you need to realize, when we cut every corner, there isn't much left. That is the actual document. That is the actual quote. The Nomad was not killed by Nintendo. The Nomad was not killed by Sony. The Nomad was killed by an internal memo. And then, even worse, there was the library. Sega's marketing, what little of it existed, leaned on a single promise. The Nomad plays your entire Genesis library, 800 games, 6 years of software, day one. This was true in the sense that the Mona Lisa is true if you describe it as a picture of a woman. It is correct, but it is not the whole story. The Nomad cannot use the Sega CD. The Sega CD attaches to the bottom of the Genesis, and the Nomad has no expansion port on the bottom. The Nomad cannot use the power base converter, which means the Sega Master System library is also locked out. The Nomad cannot, in any meaningful sense, use the 32X, the 32-bit add-on Sega had launched the year before and abandoned the same year, even though the 32X technically fits into the Nomad's cartridge slot. It fits, but it physically blocks the AV output port at the top of the unit, and the 32X requires a video loopback cable plugged into that exact port to function. The pins line up, the video does not, and then there are the individual games. A specific subset of older Genesis titles, including Decap Attack, Forgotten Worlds, and Golden Axe 2, were designed for the original 3-button Genesis controller, and break in subtle, infuriating ways when pulled by the 6-button controller layout. The Nomad is permanently hardwired to mimic. On a standard Genesis, you can fix this by holding the mode button on a 6-button controller during boot, forcing the pad into 3-button compatibility. On the Nomad, the boot sequence is different, the wiring is different, and the mode button bypass does not reliably work. The start button stops responding. Action buttons open menus that should not open. Critically acclaimed games are, on the Nomad, completely unplayable. And then there are the lock-on cartridges. Sonic & Knuckles, the brilliant cartridge that lets you stack Sonic 3 on top of it to create a single combined game. On the home console, the tower of 2 cartridges sticks up from the top of the Genesis and looks slightly silly. On the Nomad, the same tower of 2 cartridges sticks up from the top of a handheld console, transforming it into a top-heavy plastic monolith that cannot reasonably be held, cannot reasonably be played, and cannot reasonably be transported anywhere. The full Genesis library on the Nomad is not the full Genesis library. Full Genesis library on the Nomad is a series of asterisks. It dies fast. By early 1996, retailers know the Nomad is not selling. By mid-1996, Sega has quietly removed the Nomad from its active marketing literature. By 1997, Sega licenses its excess Nomad inventory to a third-party distributor called Majesco. the same company that handles the budget Genesis 3, and Majesco begins repackaging the leftovers and shipping them to clearance bins. By 1998 and 1999, consumers walking into a Toys R Us or a KB Toys can find brand new Nomads in their original boxes, marked down to $49.99. Some are marked down to $39.99. Some come with Majesco reconditioned stickers, slapped over the original Sega logos. By 1999, the Nomad is officially discontinued. Total lifetime sales, by the most generous industry estimates, approach 1 million units. Sega's original projection, the only number they got right. By comparison, the Game Boy family eventually sells 118 million. The Nomad was outsold by its primary competitor by a factor of 118 to 1. But here is the part of the story that matters. Because 30 years later, in the era of the Nintendo Switch, and the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, and 100 other hybrid consoles that disconnect from a dock, and continue playing the same game on a portable screen, you can go on eBay right now and find a working, unmodified Sega Nomad selling for $250 to $350. A fully boxed, mint condition unit commands significantly more. A console that was clearance binned for $39.99 in 1999 is now, in 2026, worth more than it was at launch. Because the Nomad was right. The Nomad was right about the hybrid. The Nomad was right about the dock. The Nomad was right about portable home console software, real software, the same cartridges, the same code. The Nomad was right about everything except the year. The Nomad was right about everything except the batteries. The Nomad was right about everything except the company that made it. In the modern modding scene, hobbyists have systematically gone back and fixed every fatal flaw the original Nomad shipped with. The blurry passive matrix CSTN screen, drained by its cold cathode backlight, is routinely cut out and replaced with a modern IPS panel. The screen becomes pixel perfect, the colors become vibrant, the ghosting disappears. The power-hungry battery sled is replaced with internal lithium-ion or lithium polymer cells, often adapted from Sony NP-F550 camcorder batteries, often charged through a USB-C port drilled into the back of the chassis. Because the IPS screen draws a fraction of the power the original CCFL backlight required, the modded Nomad now runs for 6 to 10 hours on a single charge. The leaking 1990s capacitors on the audio board are pulled and replaced. The Yamaha synthesizer sings cleanly again. A modded Sega Nomad in 2026 is everything Joe Miller's engineering team imagined Project Venus could be in 1994. It is the device Sega meant to ship. It is just 30 years late, and here is what is strange about that. What is genuinely strange about the entire history of the Sega Nomad? The machine itself was not the failure. The machine itself was correct. The vision was correct. The architecture was correct. The hybrid concept was correct. The engineering, with a single asterisk of battery chemistry, was correct. What failed was the company. What failed was the timing. What failed was the price. What failed was the corporate civil war between Redwood City and Tokyo, where executives 9,000 kilometers apart spent the back half of 1995 making contradictory decisions about a product line neither half of the company entirely understood. What failed was a memo that said when we cut every corner, there isn't much left. The Sega Nomad is the perfect microcosm of 1995-era Sega. It is brilliant, it is ambitious, it is rushed, it is starved, it is priced into oblivion. It is dead on arrival, and it is, with the benefit of 3 decades of hindsight, exactly right about where the entire video game industry would be going. Sega does not survive the decade. The Saturn fails in the West. Tom Kalinske resigns. The Dreamcast launches in 1998, and despite being brilliant, despite being forward-thinking, despite being everything Sega's hardware ever should have been, it cannot escape the brand damage. By 2001, Sega exits the hardware business entirely and becomes a third-party software publisher. The company that put a home console in your pocket in 1995 spends the rest of the 21st century making Sonic games for other people's machines. The Nintendo Switch launches in March of 2017. It is in almost every functional respect the Nomad, a hybrid console, a dock, a handheld screen, a cartridge slot, native home console software running on portable hardware. It sells 140 million units. It saves Nintendo from the disaster of the Wii U. It becomes one of the best-selling video game systems of all time. Somewhere in a Sega archive in Tokyo, there is presumably still a folder marked Project Venus. The engineering documents from 1994, the schematics, the internal projections, the cautiously optimistic 1 million unit estimate, the notes from Joe Miller's team about the touchscreen prototype they had to abandon because the technology was not ready yet. The technology eventually was ready. Sega was not. And so the Sega Nomad sits today on a shelf in a collector's apartment, modded with a modern IPS screen and an internal lithium battery, running Sonic 2 at 60 frames per second, with a USB-C port drilled into the back, charging quietly while its owner watches television. It is a portable Sega Genesis. It is a home Sega Genesis. It is, for the first time in its life, actually portable. It is the device it was always supposed to be. A child sat in the back of a Buick in 1995 and watched it die between gas stations. A grown man, who may or may not be the same child, watches it work in 2026. And the only thing that ever stood between those two moments was 6 AA batteries, a $180 price tag, and a corporate civil war the engineers were never invited to attend.